Okay, welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Kathleen Rose with Rose Associates, and we are pleased to host this first of our webinar educational series. And our firm, Rose Associates, does real estate and economic development advisory work, and we assist towns, cities, public, private, and institutional sector clients figure out their real estate strategies for community development. So with that, I am going to introduce our two panelists, Dan Douglas and Kathleen Jordan, and we will get this. Let me get the screen up here. So I'll do a quick read of the bios. Dan Douglas is Director of Urban Design for Benchmark Planning. Dan is well known for his dynamic leadership in transforming downtown Raleigh. As the founder and director of the Raleigh Urban Design Center, he led the city's strategic planning effort that leveraged over $3.5 billion of downtown investment, receiving the first ever Downtown Advocate Award from the Downtown Raleigh Alliance. Over his 26-year career, Dan has led transformative downtown master planning projects in several cities, including Raleigh, Wilmington, Chapel Hill, Concord, North Carolina. Some of you are on the call. And also gained international planning experience working in new city projects in Saudi Arabia and Morocco. He is a sought-after speaker on the topic of urban design and revitalization and has been a guest on NPR's State of Things. He has spoken at over 20 conferences locally, nationally, and internationally. He won the prestigious Eisenhower Fellowship, spending 8 weeks traveling throughout Europe, studying sustainable economic development, the effects of introduction of high-speed rail on urban centers, and the influence of the creative class in European city centers. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Architecture as well as a Master of City and Regional Planning from Clemson University. Kathleen Jordan joins us, and she has over 33 years of experience focused almost entirely on retail-related projects, working with national and international brands. Many of those years have been with Gensler. Many of you may be familiar with that work. Her experience encompasses a broad range of scope and scale, and she started a career as an in-house retail design and construction staff. She provides a unique perspective in planning and design process through the lens of product merchandising. Her experience encompasses strategy planning, merchandising, and design oversight, as well as managing project design implementation through the completion of construction. At Gensler, she was promoted ultimately to principal in 2005. And she has had a tremendous and award-winning background on a variety of projects, from small store concepts in small rural towns to the largest department stores. And her projects have provided the cornerstone of Gensler's retail design portfolio. But in 2018, Kathleen moved from New York to join us in North Carolina, in Charlotte, after having participated in a panel there, The Future of Retail in Charlotte. And during that visit, she saw the tremendous opportunity to bring her expertise to the market. And after 23 years as principal at Gensler, she recently became Vice President of Design, Planning, and Construction for Neiman Marcus Group, headquartered in Dallas, Texas. So with that, I welcome all of you and Kathleen and Dan, and I will go ahead and let Dan I'm going to get started first with a couple of quick points. So we're going to be talking about the public realm, the storefronts, and how to attract attention to your market. But the first thing is understanding your market. And for those of you in the retail business or managing and helping downtown retailers, the most important thing is really understanding what code and category of retail you are operating in, because a lot of the data that's out there is based on what we call NAICS codes, or the North American in classification system that we now use instead of SIC codes. So there's a lot of ways that we determine how your market is functioning through demand and supply, with consumer expenditures and retail sales. And I know some of you in the downtown markets or in communities we've worked with begin to understand how that works. And the most important thing is understanding your retail trade areas. There's really 4 known concepts in terms of trade area that you can utilize as far as understanding your market. And many folks kind of get stuck on one or the other. So first, there's in the door approach, and that really is a percentage game. And that says if we open a store, we're going to attract a certain percentage of people to come through the door. The other is population expenditure approach, which is what folks often see with these reports that are gap analysis reports that come through Esri and some other demographic services. And all of these have their pros and cons to them. Customer spotting is what we often see when folks ask you for your zip code, or they are asking to put you in a loyalty program. What they're trying to determine is how far and wide and where the customers come from, and that helps them define their target marketing. And then the drive time analysis, which is an illustration that you see here in terms of how many people within a certain distance. So important factors are local characteristics, growth patterns, population, traffic generators, etc. And so with all of that, that's a whole background science in terms of understanding the market. Make sure you position your information so that you can really get moving with things. So with that, we really wanted to focus today on what happens when you get folks to come to your community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and let him start with the arrival.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks to everybody for joining us this morning. The first thing that we have to talk about is the decision people make to come downtown. And there's two ways they do that. Either they're a visitor driving by, or they're a resident and trying to decide if there's something down there they need. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
So for visitors, it's about new residents. It's about wayfinding and giving people adequate direction to come to the anchors downtown where the retail is, to welcome them when they come, and to make it clear where parking is. So here's an example from Suffolk, Virginia. Next, please. Here's one from Provo. And the P with the circle is a key element for parking, pretty universally and internationally accepted. And then if you're not ready for a big, expensive wayfinding system, there was a fella in Raleigh, Matt Tomasulo, a few years back that created this Walk Your City sort of guerrilla wayfinding that makes it cheap and easy and clear for people to find things downtown and know that they're closer. So he did it by how long of a walk it is to certain things. And this got a lot of international attention. Next, please. And then the next question is parking. And it's not about free parking. It's about whether the resident or the visitor can think when they're at their domicile, am I going to be able to find a convenient space downtown? Am I going to have to walk a long way, or am I going to have to search for parking? So there's a book, Donald Shoup, next please, that wrote The High Cost of Free Parking, that I would recommend anyone in downtowns read. And his thesis is that it's not about the cost of parking, it's about the convenience. And so what he does is recommends that you meter on-street parking and raise the price of that parking till at any given time, there's one empty space per block. And that way, when someone is thinking about coming downtown, they can always think in their head, I may be able to get the spot right in front of the store I want to go to. And that removes that barrier of convenient parking. Next, please. This is what we often confront our visitors with. This is one parking lot in Suffolk, Virginia. You see all the different signs. I have to know what business I'm visiting, how long I'm going to be there, and even how much does my car weigh. There's no reason to put these barriers in front of visitors. So next, please. So the pay by space makes it easy for on-street parking. There's lots of new technology meters out there where you can pay with the card. You can wave your phone in front of it. You can, if you're in a meeting that's running long, you can add time to your meter. So you want to make it as convenient as possible to deal with the pay station. And the technology has really come a long way from, putting meters in and or quarters in. And then the next question, and I see this in every small town I've worked in, and Every small town claims to have a parking problem, and in my experience, the first problem is that shop owners always complain, but then when you take the license plate numbers of people that are parked on Main Street all day, it's always the shop owners and their employees that are parking right in front of their own shop. And so the way to solve this problem is to create convenient employee parking, usually around back, that's well lit, easy to get to, and moves those all-day parkers off the street. And paying for parking does that as well. So now that we have them in downtown, let's talk about the public realm. This is a slide of the pedestrian hero in Mexico City. This guy dresses up like a superhero and pushes cars out of crosswalks, escorts people across the street. And this is to illustrate that in most downtowns, pedestrian is king and queen. If you're not designing your downtown for pedestrians, if you're still allowing a lot of drive-through businesses, banks, and fast food places, you're really not focused on your key customer. And to get those purses and wallets into your store, they ultimately have to walk to get there. So I would encourage that you focus on the pedestrian first. Next, please. Here's an early concept drawing we did for Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh. It was 100-foot right-of-way from building front to building front. And we put in the actual smallest road we could put in and ended up with 28-foot wide sidewalks with lots of room for pedestrians and vendors and all of those things. So where you can, I would recommend that you look at widening the sidewalks in your downtown out to a minimum of 14 feet is a kind of a standard that we use. And intersections become critical too. This is the 100% corner in downtown Suffolk. There's a lot of car traffic as both of these are state roads. And so what we did for them was this introduction of bollards to keep the trucks from coming up on the sidewalk, bigger, more visible crosswalks, and lots of time, even pedestrian countdown signals to let people cross. So if intersections are your problem, if you have two state highways, you really have to focus on calming those. Next, please. And so this is the Main Street section in Suffolk. And you can see the sidewalk or the roadway, I don't know why, but the lanes were 16 feet 10 and almost 13 feet 9 wide. And so most of the space was given over to cars, and just not even that, but the space the cars would never use. So we proposed the following section next, which is again that smallest road you can make, which is 2 8-foot parking lanes, 2 11-foot travel lanes, and that got us out to almost 20-foot wide sidewalks. And that becomes really critical, as you can see on the left there, when you start talking about outdoor cafes and how does that work in your downtown. Here's an example. Concord got it 100% right when it came to widening the sidewalks. They did something we haven't seen a client do yet. We offered 3 different options for the redo of the Main Street Union in Concord, and one was no parking in the widest possible sidewalks, coming out, I think, to 22 or 24 feet. We built some sample models of that in the street so people could see what those dimensions were. And they held some town meetings and a vote, and the downtown retailers and merchants and restaurateurs decided that they thought for these 2 blocks of downtown that they would remove all the parking and get to these wide sidewalks. The problem came when they started doing the vertical part of the streetscape, and in the previous slide you could see that the trees were marching along in 20-foot increments, and many times those trees landed right in front of the entrance to a retail shop or a restaurant, or landed right in front of signage. So we met with their design team and came up with this solution, which is now you can see the property lines and that the trees are located at the property lines to sort of frame in the front of storefronts to make it easy to get into the entrances. We removed a whole planting strip that was along the edge that prevented jaywalking. You want to encourage jaywalking in your downtown if you can, if it's not a real busy main street or a state highway, to make it easy for someone if they're coming out of a restaurant and they see a retailer across the street that they want to go visit. The traffic should be calmed enough that they can just walk right across and do that. And Concord made those changes, and you end up with something like this, where the street frontage is framed, the the building is attractive and it's easy to see what's going on in there and make your decision about if this is a place you want to patronize or not. The opposite solution is the next one, where the trees aren't limbed up, they're not maintained, they're planted in the wrong spots, and who knows what business this is inside this building, because you can't tell. So if you have a chance, and we know you can't move trees, but if you've planted them and they're in the wrong locations, it's really important to think about limbing them up a little bit so that we can see inside the building, see the signage, so we can see the entrance, and that it's all quite clear what's happening there. Lighting is the second important topic, because downtowns are increasingly more used at night for dining and entertainment. This is Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh when it opened. Here you can see the trees were quite small. We had just planted them, even though we bought the biggest ones we could find. And over time, they're going to grow up and have grown up and covered this pedestrian lighting. And that's why lighting on the building fronts is also really important, because eventually your trees are going to grow up into your pedestrian scale lighting and make it seem dark, and nobody wants to visit a dark downtown, a dark retail area. Here's some examples of how you can lighten it up. In the top left, you see those marching along in sort of a pattern are those lights on the columns that come down from the building, those little orange dots. And when those trees grow up, those will provide lighting to the building side of the street. City Market is on the top right, and the twinkle lights over the street give a festive atmosphere, light it up really well. And then this is a picture I took in Europe of where if you have an interesting building facade, sometimes it's worth it to pay a lighting designer to make it pop and make it stand out and make it really attractive. Next, please. And then maintenance of your sidewalk. A lot of times trees grow up through the gate and create a trip hazard. Trees, it's very difficult, many of you know, to keep a tree alive in downtown if you don't create some structural soil trenches for the roots to grow in. And so they sometimes die. And on the lower right there, you see empty tree pits. So if a tree dies, you need to replace it as soon as you can. When you have dead trees and empty pits and poor maintenance, you're sending a signal to your patrons that, this isn't a priority area for us. So you want to remove all those, like cracked sidewalks. Here's an example of a broken sidewalk, and on the right was a repair. And even the repair doesn't really look that good. So we often recommend simple paving on a 2x2 foot grid that even any small town maintenance staff can cut through a 2x2 grid and run new pipes or wires into buildings. And when you repair it, it doesn't stand out as a big repair. So think about when you're working on streetscapes, the maintenance of it. When we spent about $30 million redoing Fayetteville Street in Raleigh, and our city manager at the time was, he wanted us to maintain it to the Disney standard, he called it. And the Parks Department, who did our street maintenance in downtown, had to create a 90-page book that outlined how to maintain every element of that streetscape, where they bought it, where they could get replacements, how to fix it. So don't think the job is done when the new streetscape is put in. Maintenance is critical. Now we'll take a look at the storefronts to attract attention to your building. Everybody, I think, who's had some design guidelines recognizes a concept sketch like this. Most main streets have a pretty typical standard shop front design, which you see in the sketch here, with sign band, a place for the awnings, lighting, the doorway, display windows, and sometimes a doorway leading to the upstairs apartment or office. I think pretty much everyone understands how to design for this, but there are some no-nos that you need to avoid. Mirrored, opaque, tinted glass, allowing doorways to be right on the edge of the right-of-way so the door swings out and blocks the sidewalk. That's a no-no. And when you add lighting, you want to have no visible bulbs. You want it to be behind opaque glass or hidden by a shade. You don't want to produce glare. And plastic, backlit lit awnings are more sort of send a signal that you're trying to compete with shopping centers. And in the windows, you don't want to have too much signage that blocks your displays. You know, a lot of times we see retailers who are supporting the community, and the window is full of, here's the next 5K fun run, here's when the Girl Scout cookies are going to be sold, and the front just becomes full of all these papers and signage, and often they're, you know, years old, and that sends a signal to people too. And then lastly, you don't want to have out of scale or poorly placed signage. You can see there's typically always a sign band under the lower cornice, where that's where you want to see it, or in the windows with some lettering painted on. You don't want to cover the whole top and blank out the windows with some big giant signage. Again, you have to remember you're scaling this signage for pedestrians really, and not a car that's going by at 40 or 35 miles an hour. And there's lots of ways to help retailers understand how this can change the impression of their buildings. This is an example I found by Mara Lowry and Nick McLeod, who went around to some small towns, maybe yours, and did some before and after Photoshop renderings of what a little paint and some new signage could do. They presented it, I think, at the Main Street Conference in 2019. I thought this was a really good one. The next two are two that we do in our shop. This was a little restaurant in Suffolk that needed some paint, needed some love, and we helped her understand that just with some paint and some new awnings, really, and a new sign, changing very little else, how we could really improve the curb appeal of her business. Next one. This is an example from Dillon, South Carolina. And here, you know, the tree is placed between the property lines. We restored the historic storefronts with wood and painted them and made the doors really pop and visible. Next. And then just to end up a little bit about cafes, because downtowns are increasingly entertainment and food options. The one on the left is the one you don't want to do. In North Carolina, the ABC code requires that you demarcate where the alcohol is allowed from a cafe, and many cities have taken that to mean fence. And so they fence off a portion of the sidewalk, forcing the walkers away from the storefronts, away from window shopping. And once you move out there towards the curb, you stay out there at the curb. You don't come back. And so the one on the right is the way to do it, where you put the cafes out by the curb. Maybe you put a two-top table up against the building, but no more than that. And you can see here in this illustration, it allows the shoppers to stay close to the windows, close to the entrance of your retail shops, and easily make that decision to come on in and take a look around. And this is sort of a European example, which is kind of the penultimate way to do a cafe. Big shades, lots of flowers, slow traffic, and all the pedestrians up against the building fronts.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
And that covers my piece.
Okay, we'll move to Kathleen and the interior layout. So once you've gotten somebody to the door in the storefront and attracted them to your community with signage and parking and all the attractive things that made them say, gee, we got to park and get out of the car and check this place out. How do you get them in the store, Kathleen?
All righty. So the magic really starts at the sidewalk, and I think Dan did a great job of sharing with you all sort of the do's and don'ts of how to craft your facade. It's really important to start expressing your personality or the point of view of your store and your store products right from the outside. So here you see on the left-hand side Dior. It's very clean, very crisp, very sharp awnings. Awnings are important because they're an attract element, and you can have fun with the underside of them as well as branding on the top side of them. But it's an opportunity to add concealed lighting to really shine on your facade and make it pop. And you want people to know where your door is. So if you use plantings near it, just really making it as welcoming as possible. The image on the right is actually from the Cheese Museum in Amsterdam, which I just thought was hysterical, and it was totally cute. But there's no reason why you can't have fun with expressing yourself and what your store has to offer on the outside. So moving on, again, having fun on the sidewalk. Dylan's Candy Bar. This is in Miami. We created. A lot of these are projects I did at Gensler. We created these giant lollipop candy cane pieces that we could mark on either side of the doorway, canopies that are branded at the umbrellas for the tables and really being colorful for the tables. So when you think about designing your shop windows, you really want to make sure that there's visibility into the store because people like to see in, but also showcase your product in a very clean and simple way. Dan was talking about cluttering your windows, and you want it as clean and free of messaging as possible, and just let the product sing for itself. If you want to go to the next one, Kathleen. So, the image on the left, to me, you want to have fun. It's okay to have a sense of humor. It doesn't have to be super serious, because it's really that sense of humor and that glimpse of your personality that attracts people into the store. On the right-hand side is a bookstore from Austin, Texas. And, books and small products are tough. If you have a big window, it's tough. But I think they did a nice job branding on the glass, as well as figuring out a way to showcase books in a stacked way and still allowing visibility above the product. If you want to go to the next slide. So when you get them into the store, you want to make sure it's clean and free of clutter. There should be a visual hierarchy so people kind of can ping pong or pinball their way through the store. It should look like an exciting journey, and they'll go to the first place they land, but then you want them to be able to look up and see, oh, I want to go there, and oh, I need to go check that out too. So having highs and lows, which I think you can see really well in both of these images, is super important. If you want to go to the next slide. And then figuring out how to merchandise in the best possible way so that the product offering is immediately apparent. But if you give space around the product, it makes it special. It sets it off as something extraordinary. So you want to have areas that, even if you have to have density, like the image in the middle, keep it organized so that this way it's clean and clear and easy to perceive what the product is. But find moments where you can set special pieces off. So you can see here on the right-hand side, set special pieces off and mix it up. You don't have to have a full concentration of all this same product. Mix it up in what we call lifestyle. If you have a store that has multiple types of product, you want to group them together in natural orders, because then you get that extra sale through the lift of the associated product. If you want to go to the next slide there. And then again, just really keeping it clean, laying out product. Apparel can be tough sometimes, and there's nothing worse than when you go into a store and it's just a sea of racks. And you want to be able to mix that up with lay tables and racks, so that this way you can lay out product that maybe has special detailing. If you have denim that has embroidery on it, you want to lay that out so that people can see the embroidery, because that's usually what the cost is and what makes it special. So think about that as you merchandise your stores. And then when you get into the idea of interior signage, depending on the scale of your store, it may be really critical to incorporate. But you want to look at it in a hierarchy, much like Dan was showing for cities, is what's at the product. So you can see on the image on the right-hand side, what does that signage need to be at the product level, on the wall level, and then on the loose fixture level. So some of you may actually need departmental signage, depending on the scale, or it may just be helpful to outline what zones you're in. And so putting that signage up above loose fixtures, above the perimeter, so that they're clearly in view, but they're not blocking product, is super important. If you want to go to the next slide, Kathleen. So, just be judicious about it, but have fun with it. There's no reason why you can't incorporate graphics, like you can see the cashier sign on the left-hand side at the NYU bookstore. incorporating graphics, incorporating a pattern in the background. It doesn't have to be just a straight up cashier. Again, this is an opportunity for you to express your voice. And in that fitting room, there was some whimsical kind of sayings, communicating, because in a fitting room, you actually have the opportunity to engage with your customer on an intimate level, because they're in there and they're going to read it. So it's a fun place to put pithy little sayings. Experience is really important. And that's not just for the national chains. That's for the little guys too. So on the left-hand side is a personalization station. That's actually a flip-flop store, Havaianas. And you can personalize your flip-flops with studs and things like that. So if you have the opportunity to do personalization with your product, people love that. On the right-hand side, again, that was NYU Bookstore. It was a retractable stadium seating section that we put on one side of the store because it's a student bookstore and they don't always have all the books. So they turned this area over to the community and they could pull that out or push it back into the wall. And it's a fun idea to be able to host events, have places for people to sit. If you're a beauty store, maybe you're doing a makeup lesson. If you're a bookstore, maybe you're having an author in and having a reading. And then the image in the right, this was actually something we had fun with. It's the little ribbons. People come in and they can grab a ribbon and they tie it onto the screen, and it harkens back to a tradition I'm not remembering the details of in Brazil. About it's like a pilgrimage place, and you go and you tie a ribbon, and it's like a wish or a prayer or something like that. But having a wall where there's staff pics or a place where people can leave little messages like, I'm here on vacation and I found this place and it's like super fun. Incorporating little moments like that where the customer can engage is a way to differentiate yourself. If you want to go to the next slide, Kathleen. And then the image on the left is a mead tasting bar in Savannah, Georgia. It's at the Savannah Bee Company. And you don't always have this opportunity, but if you are a store that's based on epicure goods, have a little tasting place. Certainly COVID has kind of created upheaval in these sort of realms, but hopefully we'll see some sense of normalcy at some point. And just incorporate, people love samplers. I mean, it's just who they are and human nature. On the right-hand side, it's a makeup station in a store. Doesn't take up a lot of space, but it gives the customer a place to play, and they love to play, and it adds to sales. If you want to go to the next slide, Kathleen, and then your cash wrap. So some of you may have moved to digital sales. I mean, certainly we see that at outdoor markets and things like that. But the cash wrap can be a fun place. It can be the heart of the store. This was a store in Savannah as well, where the cash wrap was actually quite huge, had a wrapping station, but it was really the heart and soul of the store, and it felt like a hotel desk. And, the people were there and they were friendly and willing to help with advice and things like that. So think about that when you're putting in locating your cash wrap. And here's another one. This is a small store in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, where the store wanted to feel like a revitalized general store. So we created a cash wrap that incorporated jewelry display, incorporated candy display, as well as the POS, and opportunity for seating. We have food items behind the wrap area. So again, it just becomes that area that's a knowledge center for the store as well as a hub. So looking at the plan, since we were talking about the cash wrap, there's sort of like probably 3 natural acts for putting in a cash wrap. This one illustrates at the back of the store. So the advantage of that is you can do some kind of feature branded wall behind it. It's visible when you first walk in. It helps the customer orient it. It's a very standard layout. You can do clean product presentation along the walls and in the center. And you free up the center from the cash wrap. So this one shows a a centralized cash wrap. So you would enter into the store here and it would kind of cut the distance. So this is actually a good option if you have a very long store. I mean, depending on the age of the building that you're going into, you may have a very long and narrow space. So this could be a nice option because it cuts the distance for the person, the salesperson, to be able to view equally the front and the back spaces of the store, and become a central point in the overall length of the store for customers to kind of come and orient themselves. In this particular case, we located the fitting rooms behind the cash wrap, but I mean, they could be at the back wall, side wall, etc. And then there's always, that one building that gives you a wonky base building layout. So it could be a corner. This one was actually in an airport, which was very challenging. It had doors on both sides. So we ended up going with the cash wrap on the side of it, and then fitting rooms on the other side. And there's advantages to putting your cash wrap on the side. It's similar to centralizing it, because you can locate it midpoint on the length of your wall and have full visibility, 180 degrees of what's going on in the store. So you want to think, when you're putting in your cash wrap, you want to think about how many employees you're going to have, who's going to be on the floor, visibility to the front door as well as to the stock area, and the ability to service quickly at the cash wrap as well as on the floor. So, because a lot of you, I'm sure, probably only have one, maximum two people, maybe on a weekend, working the store. So the cash wrap location really becomes critical when you think about those things. And that's it.
Okay, so with that, we're going to go to Q&A, and if anyone has questions or comments, if you could put them in the chat box, we will try to get to them, and or folks can unmute their screens. Okay, for Dan, a question from Nina. Oh, here we go. Dan, how did you deal with the process of streetscape projects on state roads? We want to make changes to our downtown sidewalks, but it is difficult to get DOT approval or buy-in.
Yeah, this is all this is always a challenge. Most states, including North Carolina, at the DOT level, have adopted a complete streets policy, which encourages local district engineers to, in the context of a main street, to balance the needs of the traffic versus all the other needs. And it really depends on, in our experience, how well and how thoroughly the district engineer, who's sort of the man or the lady in charge of a specific geographic area, whether or not they've supported this policy. And so I would review the North Carolina Complete Streets policy and then use that in discussions with the district engineer about how to find compromises that work for both the retailers and the businesses on the street as well as the traffic. And often another thing we recommend, because they're mostly worried about trucks and delivery traffic, that are going to a destination through your town, is that we like to explore the creation of a truck route. So if you can get some of the heavier trucks off of Main Street and divert them around downtown, they're not going to shop at your store anyway. So that's easy to, make that justification. And then you can lower the traffic volume to the people who are your most likely customers, the local residents, cars, visitors passing through. And that enables the DOT to think about it again in a different way, because the idea of moving the trucks through, now that you have a bypass route, has sort of solved a problem for them. And now you can begin to focus on how can we calm the traffic or do some bump outs or adjust the parking in ways that allow us to widen the sidewalks and make it more pedestrian friendly. But it is a challenge. And oftentimes it takes some political might. The transportation board is a bunch of political appointees. And so we just did a project in Myrtle Beach where we had to, use all of Myrtle Beach's political might to get the commissioners of the Department of Transportation from the top down. You should always start and work from the bottom up. But at some point, if you hit a stopping point where they just won't consider your point of view, sometimes you have to play from the top down if you're town with your local representatives, or if you have a connection to the transportation commission or board, and come that way. But I don't mean to undersell it. It is often difficult, and sometimes it takes them years to come around to your point of view, and it's really a tragedy.
Good. And another question, we seem to be focused on the traffic issues, what's a good strategy for slowing cars down?
Yeah, a good strategy. There's a number of them. One is speed limit first. Just lower the speed limit down to 25. There's lots of statistics out there that show, just on safety factors alone, if you happen to be a pedestrian and get hit by a car going 25 versus 35 versus 45, your chance of survival is way higher the slower the car is moving. And so document all the accidents that occur on your street. Often the police department does that. And so you can use that to help make an argument for slower traffic. Trees, large grown trees, it's been shown, have a visual sort of tightening of the roadway that causes our psychology as humans to slow down a little bit. And bump outs at the corner, where you narrow the traffic lanes as much as you can and have the bump out of the sidewalk to narrow that traffic lane down to maybe 11 feet on each side, so 22 feet. That will slow cars as well. And also, believe it or not, introducing a little bit of confusion often slows people down. If they're not sure what to do, they go slower. So doing unusual things like lights over the road, or banners, like a welcome to town banner, something that they're not used to seeing, sends them a signal that this is a different environment. And the biggest way we did that on Fayetteville Street in Raleigh is in the City Plaza section. We removed the curbs. We took the curbs away, took the sidewalk pavement across the street, separated the cars from the pedestrian area by bollards. That's an unusual condition, not seen very much. And entering into the plaza on both sides, we brought the sidewalk up, so it's kind of like the roadway up. So it's kind of like a speed table. So you send a signal of the sound of the car hitting the brick pavers, and the click, 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 click. That tends to slow people down. The absence of curbs slows them down. And all of these different visual cues, there's a plethora of them that you can use that will send a psychological signal to people that this place is something different and I need to slow down.
Okay, and on that, someone asks, are the truck routes effective in the days of Google Maps, Waze, etc.? We often see this notion of truck routes.
Well, that becomes a question of enforcement at that point. I mean, you're only trying to get the trucks to go around downtown. And so unless they're making a local delivery, you can have the local police begin to enforce the truck route and make sure that every truck that's coming down your main street is heading to a local, within the truck route bypass area destination. They're not always effective. Truckers have a mind of their own. They're in a hurry. They're used to going a certain way. It takes time to get adopted, but limited enforcement often can send the signal, and the word gets around that, hey, don't take your truck down Highway 70 and Smithfield because they're enforcing the bypass route. But there'll always be scofflaws who, come through, and you can't stop that, but you can limit it.
Yeah. And so I had a question for you, Dan. There's been conversation about the cars versus pedestrians versus bikes. What are some good ideas? And I've had some discussion recently with a community about, some folks are doing brightly colored crosswalks or art in place of crosswalks. And I know that there's been discussion with NCDOT about the safety and distraction of that versus making the pedestrian areas more obvious when you come to that 100% corner, instead of just the typical black and white piano key style. Is there any suggestions or things that you have for how to improve the crosswalks for visibility and safety so the pedestrian knows it's okay and safe? A lot of communities, the crosswalks are faded. They're not, you're not sure if you're taking your life in your hands. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm in favor of the different piano, the art type crosswalks. It's like I just mentioned, it's that new element that confuses people a little bit and causes them to slow down, which makes it safer. I know, here in Raleigh, we have some of those in Glenwood South where people have painted, interesting patterns and graphics into the crosswalk. So I am a complete supporter of that. Of course, maintaining, if it is a state highway and the state guys and ladies aren't really welcoming to that idea, I agree with you that maintaining the piano key or the ladder type crosswalk is really critical. Countdown signals that help the pedestrian understand when the light is going to change is particularly helpful for older people and people with disabilities so that they know they have enough time to make it across. And the bump outs really are critical to closing that conflict distance, right? So if you can bump the sidewalk out that 8 feet for the on-street parking, that closes the distance of that crosswalk 16 feet, and that limits the conflict area between cars and pedestrians. And then lastly, some vertical element, whether I mentioned, a sign that gets stretched across the street for the upcoming festival or whatever, or maybe some vertical public art in that bump out that sends a visual signal to drivers that this is a different kind of intersection. Things like that. There's a bunch of different strategies, but those are some of the most common.
Right. Awesome. Okay, I see a few folks are typing, so we'll wait a minute to see if there's any other conversations or questions happening. A few folks are typing. Kathleen, I had a quick question for you. In this age of COVID, we talked about this whole dynamic between brick and mortar stores versus online sales and marketing and how to blend those two together. And you hear the term omni-channel, which, retailers can't be just in one dimension, if you will. Can you address that?
Oh, sure. I think it's important for any kind of retailer, regardless of scale, to have an online presence. Even if they don't necessarily sell product from the website, it's an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your audience, to provide information, to, again, espouse a point of view. If you're a home goods kind of store, maybe you want to partner with someone who can share recipes. I'm a big believer in strategic partnerships as well with adjunct types of products and or services. And so your website is actually an opportunity to do that. If you have the sophistication and the bandwidth to create an app, that's even better because everybody walks around with their phone. And a lot of times what you'll see is they will go online, they'll look at your products, and they'll walk into the store knowing that you have it and know quite a bit about it, but they'll want to try it on. And they didn't buy it on the website because they didn't want to commit to it without trying it on, feeling the fabric, etc., or looking at the product in real time. So that's always going to be the advantage of brick and mortar over online, is the ability for people to come in, get additional information from the salespeople, and to touch and feel the product. So if you use the two of them in concert and provide information, welcome them in, always, whatever you can do to advertise in-store services and/or just make it enticing. Like I really want to go, putting photos of your store on your website can be a real attraction factor to have people want to come in.
Sure.
And
Okay.
Kathleen,
Yeah.
I just read for the first time in the Wall Street Journal last week an article by this guy named Mike Byrne, who's a downtown sort of retail consultant, not merchandising but marketing. That bricks and mortar has distinct advantages over online, and that Amazon, when you think about returns, the cost of shipping, all these things, that Amazon is beginning to open bricks and mortar because the cost of a point of sale is so much cheaper. So I think maybe for the first time, we're starting a little bit to see that pendulum swing back to bricks and mortar. Do you have experience with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, now I joined Neiman Marcus, so about 3 months ago now, and it's our business is doing great. And while a lot of the business was happening online when the stores were closed, people were dying to get back into store, and the amplification of in-store service for us has been a priority because people want to engage with people. They want to hear the stories behind the products. They want to know about the quality of the garment or what have you. And hosting in-store events, we do a regular in all our stores. We have various calendars of events that go around different themes of fashion and art and beauty and all of that. So I think it's it's crazy to think that brick and mortar will go away. It definitely has the distinct advantage of being physical. The ironic thing is like Kohl's saw Amazon as an opportunity and took advantage of it for people to come and do returns at Kohl's because they were seeing the lift. And at first people are like, why would they do that? Well, strange bedfellows may actually give you serious lift in your own retail environment, and it's it worked. It really worked well for Kohl's. So.
Yeah, two more great questions popped in. Many times we don't recommend awnings on a north-facing building. They also get mildewy, etc. So what else can a business add to their front facade to make the building more eye-catching, particularly at the level of the car line, something besides a flag or a sign? You mentioned plantings around the doors, that kind of thing. Anything else that you can think of that you could suggest?
I think blade signs are pretty great. They kind of harken back to the days of old. I know just from myself, I take a lot of pictures of blade signs, and I apologize for not including any. But again, it's an opportunity to have fun. If you can have them lit, even better. But that one bookstore in Austin that I shared, she has a blade sign, and it's like a book. So it's a book on its side with the pages splayed out. So when you're looking at it straight on, it looks like a book kind of opened sort of like this. And then when you're walking down the sidewalk, her name for the store is on this side of it. So it's an opportunity to have fun, treat it like an object that plays with what kind of product you have. Whatever you can put out there as an attract element. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have a canvas awning. You can do glass, you can do metal, provided that you can finance, afford that and maintain it, and that the building structure can support something of a different materiality. And it doesn't always have to be solid. You can do it where it's perforated or it's a mesh. I mean, Sunbrella has some amazing colors, and there's no reason you couldn't use a Sunbrella fabric. So there's don't think you have to do just the straight up option, and maybe it's worth engaging a design professional when it comes to things like that, even if you don't want to pay them to do the entire facade or whatever, just to kind of brainstorm on ideas. Most architects and interior designers are addicted to creating, so they'll be happy to do an hour session with you, 2-hour sessions if you ask. I couldn't imagine anybody walking away from that, just because we love to do it.
Right. And for Kathleen, back to the inside, how do you encourage small businesses to adopt better interior design practices and merchandising practices in a way that doesn't come off as telling them what to do? What are some good strategies to kind of approach some of these retailers? Because many of them don't have formal training. They just kind of, this is my dream to open a store, and they really have no experience, and they just kind of go by the seat of their pants, so to speak. So what are some ways for the downtown managers or for folks to approach small retail boutiques and help them to do a better job, which obviously would make them more successful?
Well, so here in Charlotte, right from when I got here, I dug in pretty quickly with Charlotte Center City Partners, which is the Uptown advocacy group for business. And I just donated my services, and I did a presentation on retail design and good criteria, from very similar to this presentation, where it was from the outside. How do you do attraction from a car driving down the street? How do you place make in front of buildings, to setting your retailer up for success with signage criteria and all that, and then once they get inside the store. So, I mean, if town managers can do outreach to design professionals that specialize in retail, because I will say that not all designers are created equal. Retail is a specialty, just like town planning is a specialty. And you want to make sure that the professional that you engage really understands, has a depth of expertise in this area, because it's very different from office buildings and other typologies. So,
Yeah.
so
Well,
that's certainly
yeah,
one
we
way
have
to do
some
it.
other questions, but unfortunately, we've already gone over our time. So in the interest of everybody's time, I want to thank everyone again for attending. Thank you, Dan and Kathleen, for a fabulous presentation. One question came through about tourism, et cetera. So maybe we can have a follow-up with some folks in the tourism industry, Laura, and we're going to try to get some education seminars. So if you have suggestions for future educational seminars and what topics you'd like to see discussed, then we can certainly bring in yet another panel of experts that we work with around the state to help with that. So we thank everyone, and we also want to make a special shout out to North Carolina Downtown Development Association, who helped get the word out and sponsor this event with us. And we would ask that you, if you don't already belong to NCDDA, that you go to their website and join, or certainly make a donation to them, since we offer these webinars free. So in lieu of charging, we suggest you just make a donation to your North Carolina Downtown Association. So with that, I will stop recording and say thank you to all. We will provide a link for this presentation to everyone so they can see it, even with all our little wonkiness with technology. But thank you all so much, and we will see you soon.
Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.